Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025, Radnor Township School District Policy Committee meeting. Boy, that's helpful. I like that.
Right.
The public can't see. There's a new screen that's very large and helps us, so that's great. I'd like to begin with introductions and administrative remarks. We have with us our solicitor, our student and our faculty and our student representatives, Ms. Peterson and Ms. Atkinson. And before we get underway, I would like to present our certificate of recognition to Connie Atkinson. This is in recognition of your role and of service on the Radnor Township School Board 24-25 school year on our policy committee. And so I'd like to thank you for being here, wish you a great summer, and give you this little certificate. There you go. Thank you. And want to thank you for the thoughts you've shared and the perspective. We've valued it and we appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. And with that, we will have administrative remarks from Dr. Hand.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to our last policy committee meeting for the school year. So it's been a great year, and we've tackled and reviewed over 20 board policies and administrative regulations this year. So if you rewind back, we've swooped into the year with a swarm of legislative action that guided our policies, and then we continued to roll into our review of our 2008 policies, which we had been reviewing for the last 2 years. Some policies we tackled were a bit simpler in our review. Some policies took more time and engagement. But every item we reviewed, we approached each with diligence and dedication, which is honestly a true hallmark of this committee's work and commitment. Again, tonight is also Connie's last meeting with us as our student representative, so Connie, thank you for loaning your experience and your perspective and your voice in here. And while not always the most glamorous work, it is very significant and important work, and please know that the work that you have done here has helped make your school better. On an administrative note, we have made one minor adjustment to an administrative regulation. That's AR 628, and that's on federal fiscal compliance. And the adjustment was based on an audit finding. And it was simply adding a citation to a code, which is adding citation 200 for section 200.403. It was literally adding a citation, and then one additional item which mirrors that code. They wanted us to have that in there as part of the audit, so we did make that change to AR 628. And tonight, to round out our year of work, we are concluding with 3 policies for second read and review.
Thank you, Dr. Hand. Okay, so we're going to get right underway with our public comment. Do we have any live public comment this evening? Do we have any recorded public comment? So we do not have any public comment tonight. We will move right into our first, our review of minutes. We have our policy committee meeting from May 6th. If the committee's had an opportunity to review the minutes, are they fine as recorded? Yes, great. So we'll take those as accepted. And we will move into our first agenda item, which is policy 623, the district-initiated real estate tax assessment appeal. This is a new policy. It is up for second read and adoption. Dr. Hand?
Thank you. Policy 623, again, is a new policy for second read. This is a new policy that's meant to authorize the district to file assessment appeals related to district priorities that may have been underassessed or no longer exempt in order to increase revenue and uniformity in the district's tax base. Since our last meeting, adjustments include ensuring the word appeals accurately reflects real estate tax appeals where appropriate and other minor wording adjustments.
So thank you. Do we have any comments on this policy this evening? From anyone in the policy committee? Okay, great. So then we can expect to see this policy on our agenda. I think we have our business meeting next week, next Tuesday, June 10th, and we can expect to see this on the agenda for a second read and adoption. And with that, we will move into our second, our second agenda item, which is policy 144.1, the selection policy for Radnor Township School District Libraries. This policy is also up for second read and adoption. Dr. Hand?
Thank you. Policy 144.1 is recommended to be renamed 144, and this is for second read, and it's under review tonight based on, again, community and board feedback. The updates in here include modernization of the selection and deselection process, removal of the material reevaluation procedure selection to be part of the separate policy, which is our next one, recommended as 145. And there have been other adjustments since this committee had last met based on this committee's recommendations and conversations that we have in the deselection criteria. That now refers back to the selection criteria. And we've also clarified year-end inventory to become now annual inventory, since it doesn't just occur at the year-end, but rather is ongoing. And there were other minor wording adjustments as recommended by the committee.
Great. So this policy and the one coming after it have certainly been the focus of our attention the last few months. For this second read, do we have any comments or feedback from the committee? No? Connie or Ms. Peterson, do you have any comments? All righty. There's one or two minor typos of just grammar, so I'll take that offline with you. But with the consent of the committee, we will expect to see this policy on the June 10th agenda for second read and adoption. Okay, great. Let's move into our next agenda item, which is policy 145. Concerns regarding library materials. This is also a new policy and is also up for a second read and adoption. Dr. Hand.
Thank you. This is the new policy that separates material reevaluation from policy 144.1 into a standalone policy. This version outlines procedures for concerns regarding library materials, working with the librarian and building principal, and parent-guardian request for material limitation for their child. Since the last policy meeting, adjustments include renaming the policy to concerns regarding library material, changing the word trust to rely in 2 separate sections, and adding that materials are not to be removed unless they fall under the selection and deselection process in policy 144 or with an affirmative majority vote of the school board.
Great. Do we have any comments? I actually have some comments from this, and I'll welcome Mr. Christofko's guidance on if some of the things I'd like to review about this tonight, if they become substantive. If they do, and the committee wants to proceed, then I think we could very well see this policy again for first read, in which case it would just stay as first read over the summer, and then we would see it in August or September for a second read, depending on what people think and what feedback we get tonight. But I'll start with, does the committee have any questions, thoughts, concerns, comments? Anything they'd like to bring forward? Connie or Ms. Peterson?
Not right now.
Okay, so, at our board meeting, we had a pretty lengthy discussion and a robust discussion and vote on what was essentially the crux of this policy, is whether or not this board wanted to have a challenge procedure and a challenge criteria for parents who brought forth concerns or people who brought forth concerns about our library materials. The will of the board is that we would not like to have a formal complaint process and a challenge process, and so the board is, taking this work in that direction and bringing forth a policy that will not have that type of a challenge in it. At the time, I had some minor language things. I've given some more time to reflect on this. Ms. Lau and I spoke. We want to make sure that we do our best work with this policy. We got to the crux of the big decision. The board gave us their direction, but there are some minor edits that, frankly, I just didn't feel like were worth going into if this wasn't the policy that our board was going to go with. So I would, if you would bear with me, I do have some thoughts. I don't actually think I got even into that much of this one last month. Up in the purpose, it says individuals may have, it's the last sentence of the purpose. It says individuals may have concerns about the appropriateness of library resources. I would propose that we change that sentence to say individuals with concerns shall follow the procedures. It's a little bit confusing to have may and shall in the same sentence. So if we are okay with that, to change that sentence to say individuals with concerns about the appropriateness of library resources for their child shall follow the procedures outlined in this and other board policies. And if everybody's okay with that.
I mean, appropriateness seemed to be kind of a hot button word last time. You could actually just take it out. Say individuals with concerns about library resources. That's just a thought.
Oh, do we have a thought on, do either of you have a thought on that?
I love that idea because who determines what is appropriate? Unless you're gonna define the term appropriateness, you know, what I might find appropriate, Connie might not, you know, I feel like that, if you take out the word completely, you don't need it. I mean, it definitely, yeah, I agree, 100%, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
So then it also.
Yeah, I think we will adjust that down at the bottom, I agree with you. All right, so then, Mr. Christopher wouldn't change that. Individuals with concerns about library resources for their child shall follow the procedures outlined in this and other board policies. Let me just take that out. Okay. Under the guidelines, it says, current parents and guardians and students with a question or concern about specific, and I would just say print or digital resources available in the library, should state their concerns to that school librarian and building principal. We just want to clarify that it's, just, you know, you would go to the librarian that's in that building. I'm happy to kind of read this. You guys can push back wherever you care. The librarian and building principal or designee will listen to the concerns shared. And as the next sentence says, as part of the discussion, an explanation of the library selection policy, I would like to put in parentheses policy 144, just to be clear about that, will be provided. I'd like to not strike the next sentence, but I would like to move it not in that spot. The next sentence would say, if the discussion with the librarian and building principal or designee fails to resolve the concern, that concern may be shared with the superintendent or designee. Now, that basically just skips the sentence about materials for a moment. The word informal in that line, you know, that was back when we were going to have an informal procedure and a formal procedure. The word it's actually not an informal procedure. You need to go to the building principal and the librarian, and, you know, if you have a concern, state your concern. So it's not actually informal. But it is a discussion. And I do think that in the guidelines, it's appropriate at this point, although the purpose says the building principal, you know, in the guidelines, it may be a designee, it may be an assistant principal, or someone else in that building. And then that sentence would follow directly with the last paragraph, which says, additionally, parents or guardians have the right to determine, I think we could just say, determine the library resources for their own child. And because the purpose said child, I think we should keep it in the singular here. So it would just say, additionally, parents and guardians have the right to determine library resources for their own child, and may restrict specific titles or named resources for their child that their child may check out of the library utilizing the building procedure. So I don't actually know, and I know we've talked anecdotally about this. A few years ago, we did give parents a way to say, if you have a concern about a book that you want your child to have access to, you know, you can restrict it. I'm not actually positive what that procedure is. I know it's not a policy. I believe in some buildings and some levels, it may be in the student handbook, but I'm not actually positive what it's called. So it felt to me like, one board member reached out to me and said, if we're gonna say that you have this process that you can follow, we should allude to it in some fashion, which is why I'm suggesting that if you want to restrict your child's access to a title or resource, you can do it utilizing that building's procedures, because I don't actually know what the building procedure is. And Dr. Hand, if you know it, that would be lovely. Mr. Kostofko, if you have a thought on this, board members, if you have a thought on what I'm proposing here for wording, you know,
The procedure might not be the same.
you might need to mic, yeah.
The procedure might not be the same in every building, so I think your language is good, using the building procedure, because it might be different for the high school versus an elementary school.
That was
Yeah.
kind of my thinking, I think there's a lot of, I don't know how formal the student handbook is in elementary school, and certainly what a fifth grader might read would be different from a first grader. So if we're okay with that.
Ms. Stern, do you
Sure.
think that is determined by the building library staff in conjunction with administration or teachers?
So because I don't remember the specific procedure that was created a few years ago. This is one of those times where I'm gonna go back to the purpose and say, I rely on our administration and our building principals and our building librarians and our administration to, they've told us that there's a process and a procedure when parents raise a concern. I have every belief and trust in that. If that's the case, then that's the case. And we can certainly clarify, I think, Dr. Hand, I think we could say to you, it would certainly make sense for there to be some thought to make sure that it's consistent among building levels and all of that. Does that make reasonably sense? I mean, if you're at one elementary school, I think you should probably be able to rely on the procedure at the elementary level would be the same among the three buildings. But again, that's where I kind of leave the administration to do their work of administering, the policies of the district. That's their job. The last sentence that I put to the end, whether we keep the one that's exactly in here or we change it slightly or we, another board member brought forth a concern or a question and suggested that we word it slightly differently. I'm not attached to this, I just am raising it. As the policy reads, do we think it's clear that if a parent brings forth a concern and the librarian agreed with it, that the librarians and the building principal are able to independently decide, yes, yes, the book should stay, or no, the book should not stay? Or do we think that this policy leaves building principals and particularly librarians with the belief that every book that has a concern brought forth should come to the board? I think that's kind of the last, I'm just sharing with you the thought that was brought forth to me. That, do we feel confident that what we're saying here is what the intention is, which is that, if a parent brings forth a concern and the building librarian agrees with them, they have the autonomy to remove the book. They agree with the concern. And if they don't agree with the concern, the book does not get removed.
I just have one. So,
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps recourse to the board can be packaged up as an appeal process, right? Like, if the parent doesn't agree with the administrative decision, they can make an appeal to the board or something?
Well, to some extent, that was kind of the conversation that we had at last week's board meeting, which is only to say, I feel like in this community, parents feel very empowered when they have a concern or an upset and they don't feel like it's getting addressed. They have not yet, I find that they have figured out how to make their concerns, to aware, the board aware of their concerns. I don't really have, I don't have any doubt that if there were a concern among the community, that parents would bring forth a concern to the board if they felt like it wasn't getting addressed. I feel like people have agency and a voice. We had students, I mean, look at how many students we had come. They had a concern. They knew where to come and where to share their concern. So to your point, Dr. Babson, sorry. I think that's true. I didn't read it that way. I felt very clear that if there were, if the librarians, in the librarian's estimation, the concern was valid or not valid, that it was clear in this policy how they could proceed. However, given the concern that was shared with me, alternate language, so again, ignore what's in the policy, and I apologize, I literally wrote this about 10 minutes ago. We could have as the last sentence, materials shall only be removed from the library guided by the criteria of policy 144. And all that's really saying is, if a librarian has a concern, or if the librarian's doing their deselection process, and they decide that a book should be removed, they are by definition following policy 144, which provides for the selection and deselection of library materials. And that if there were a concern brought forth, if there were concerns in the community that books would be removed and we wouldn't know about it, then we would just say materials can only be removed as a result of policy 144. They actually still can't be removed under this policy. Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry. I know that, I was throwing a lot at you, and I want to hear what everybody else has to say.
Okay, so I loved how you reworded that, because when I look at this sentence, materials that do not meet the selection and deselection criteria should not be added or removed without an affirmative majority vote of the school board. We do have a vocal community, which I love, but at the same time, if they were to bring, like, let's say the librarian and the person that brought the concern, they're at a standstill, they don't agree. What would then be the procedure for them to bring the book forth to the board? Or would the board get involved after the disagreement? You know, like, I would hate to see, you know, I don't even know, like, a line of people that said, well, I disagree with this book. You know, is it done in a committee meeting? Is it done, like, how does it get on the board agenda to even get a 2/3 vote?
Well, first of all, it's not 2/3,
I mean, I'm sorry, the
affirmative majority.
affirmative, whatever, like, how would that then, I'm in disagreement with that. I don't like that at all, to be perfectly honest. I feel like the librarians, going back to the sentence that you said, going back to policy 144 makes more sense. That I feel like encompasses the challenge and then the resolution to that challenge. I guess I would be concerned about if the challenge, if the person doesn't agree with that book or with the decision that was made, when does the board get involved then? Does that make sense? Am I articulating that correctly?
I think what I hear you saying is, and this is a very likely scenario, a parent brings forth a concern, and the librarian and the building principal, because remember, it's a meeting with two people, they don't agree with the, no, they don't agree with the parent's concern, you know, and let's just keep it very clear. The parent picks up a book that's blue and says, I don't want this book in the library because the cover is blue. And the librarian says, we are perfectly fine with having books that have a blue cover in our library. I'm using a very inane example for simplicity. And the parent is not happy with that. They do not want a book with a blue cover in the library. The parent may, look at the second paragraph, may bring that concern to the superintendent or designee. Dr. Batchelor, I had a conversation with our school librarian. I don't think that a book with a blue cover should be in the library. I had a conversation with the librarian and the building principal. They don't agree with me. I am very certain Dr. Batchelor would have a really nice conversation with that person and explain to them that, you know, the board has made it clear that we trust the judgment of our librarians and with our building principals, and if in our school librarian's opinion, a book with a blue cover is a perfectly acceptable and reasonable book, and books with blue covers win awards, and it's going to stay in the library, unfortunately, that parent will be disappointed with the outcome. And then that parent can say, well, what can I do? And Dr. Batchelor would probably let them know, well, we have a procedure if you would like to restrict your child from checking out the book with the blue cover. And that's what they would do. They would restrict their child's access to the book with the blue cover. And that's, to my knowledge, that's it. That's how the policy reads, right? I mean, that's, I could try to be as illustrative as I could be. You know, that's what it would be. I've talked enough. I mean, you guys may have thoughts. I've shared a lot. I apologize. So, you know, it sounds, I mean, I think, just based on nobody kind of pushing back at me, up until the conversation about the sentence, about the materials sentence, people were basically okay with what I was proposing as some changes? Yes? You're taking it in. Put your mic up.
No, I'm listening to your comments, and are you proposing to remove the last sentence, materials do not meet the selection and deselection criteria? Is that what you're
My
proposing?
suggestion would be to, my question was to the affirmative majority vote of the school board. That was my comment to, I don't necessarily think it needs to go that far to have that in there, but I was also then curious what would be the procedure to get to that board vote, I guess, you know, because like you had said with your example, if, you know, they meet with the building principals, and again, they go through all those steps, if that sentence is in there, it leads me to believe that then I do have an audience for the board, and then the board, what if, you know, if it's a affirmative majority and the affirmative majority doesn't like blue, and then the book then is removed, but that, I guess it just feels a little murky to me when we've been through all the process prior.
Well, I mean, ultimately, and I want to make sure that you get your question answered, but ultimately, if I can just finish the thought, I think it would be a similar situation as what we just experienced the last few months, is that it, you know, if a parent would come and make public comment, or they would write to the board and say, I don't like I don't like books with blue covers, and they would have to find out, do they have a board that agrees with them? I mean, that's democracy. I mean, Janie, you're always so good at this part of that.
So I think it would just be, you know, how do you get any item on the agenda, right? So the way it works is that our president, Ms. Dunn, has the right to set the agenda as board president. But another way we can, any member of this community can petition the board to take up an item, would be via the special meeting procedure, by which you need at least 3 board members to kind of basically petition the president to call a special meeting to address whatever item it is. So, you know, there's an existing procedure by which, you know, any member of the community or members of the community feel like it's urgent enough, important enough for the board to take up, you know, outside of the board deciding to do it on its own. So I think what we're trying to communicate is that, you know, this decision to remove any title from the library is momentous enough and impactful enough that we feel like it should meet that bar, right, for inclusion to, you know, ask the board to devote a measure of its time to consider an item of that import. But I think the original reason why we added the sentence was that a few of the board members had expressed concern that, you know, either the librarians or the administration could come to their own decision and agree with a parent, and the board would never be notified about it. I think that was the original concern that we were trying to address, was that, you know what, like, not only do you need to notify the board before you can remove a title, but actually the board has to be the one to make that decision through an affirmative majority vote. So, I mean, it cuts a little bit against, all that I heard us say about trusting our librarians and the administration, because, like, on the one hand, it's like we want to trust them, we want to empower them and let them do their jobs, but then we still have this, like, fear that somehow we're going to have librarians and administrators who don't agree with us, the board, and we want to make sure that in that case, the board is notified and we have something, we can do something about it. So, I agree that it's a little bit intellectually, like, dissonant, but that was, I don't feel like we need it, but I think that sentence was added to assuage the concerns of some of our fellow board members.
Ms. Lau, what were you going to say before? Oh, sorry. Lawn. Because I started to say lawn and then switched it, but go ahead. Ms. Rosenblum, what were you going to say?
Ms. Lau insinuated that what I was thinking in that last sentence is that we wouldn't know if a book was taken out unless we were approached by the community, and that really covers that in that sentence.
Wait, I'm not. That really covers
in that
that.
Sentence,
In which
materials
sentence?
that do not. The last sentence, materials that do not meet the selection and deselection criteria in policy 144 shall not be added or removed without an affirmative majority vote of the school board. Well, the school board would really not know if a book is being removed unless someone expressed a concern, right?
Right. Well,
So, and then that's when it would come to the board.
Books are removed, based
Or
on
added.
the weeding process too, and you guys don't know what titles are
Well,
removed.
that's allowed.
Right. So only with the challenged, with a
Well,
concerned
it wouldn't be
book. Well,
a concern.
With a concerned
It
book.
would be a concern.
Okay.
So, now, I gave you language a moment ago, that was what somebody else suggested to me. What I, separately, because I had some long conversations this weekend about this sentence that Ms. Rosenblum just referenced. And it's tricky, you have to remember as you're reading it, that when you're talking about meeting the criteria of the selection process, that's a positive, and if it's meeting the criteria of the deselection, that's really a negative of the selection process. Deselection is the negative of the deselection. So then I played with this a little bit myself, only to say, and I still think this should be the last sentence of the policy, so I would propose that we move it to the end regardless, but listen to it this way. Materials that meet the selection criteria in policy 144 shall not be removed without an affirmative majority vote of the school board. And all that's saying is if it meets the selection criteria, it's appropriate, it's relevant, it's factually accurate, according to reputable sources. If you read through this selection, it's engaging, it's addresses a wide variety of topics, all that. If it meets that selection criteria, and still someone is proposing to remove it, then that removal should have to be by an affirmative majority vote of the school board.
I like that better.
So you take out deselection, and by the way, this isn't the what really kind of coalesced for me on late Sunday afternoon, what really coalesced for me is that this policy should not have anything about adding books to the library, because this isn't a library selection policy. And as soon as I realized that I could be striking the word "shall not be added," then it clarified for me, then we don't need that deselect. We can keep this as this sentence in the positive and say it that way. Did you follow what I said, Mike? Do you need me to say it again?
I did.
Do you want me to say it again?
Was it your intent that would apply to the old, worn, and damaged materials too? that
No,
last
because they
sentence?
don't meet the selection criteria. If they are old and worn and damaged, then they no longer meet the selection criteria, because the selection criteria says stuff is in good condition, it's relevant, I believe, and if I'm wrong on that and there's a slight wording that needs to be changed to my sentence, but I think if you go back and read 144, the selection criteria under 144 presumes that things are in good condition.
Yeah, 4 says about physical format, appearance, and durability suitable for their intended use.
Right,
So-
that's
Right.
why I felt like we could keep it in the positive, because an old book does not meet the selection criteria. An old, worn, damaged book that's falling apart. And by the way, you can remove that, and further in that, in policy 144, it says even if you deselect a book because it's old and worn, it still is up for, the librarian still has the authority to decide, do they want to replace that? It's a great book, it's just old, so let's get a new copy. Like, that's a perfectly valid, I'm sure our librarians do that all the time. That's great. They should do that with the really great books that get used a bunch and, so anyway, that's why I thought we could say it that way. I felt like 144 addressed that. So, because I think that was at the heart of, look, this is, and I agree with you, Ms. Lau. This was not my hill to die on, and what I don't want to see happen, what I would not want to see happen, is librarians, if they happen to get a challenge, still feel like they should have the board check on every decision. I don't think that's my intention at all. But I also don't want librarians and building principals to feel the pressure and the burden. I don't want that either. I don't want that either, but I don't think that this creates that. And here's the other big thing, because I've been on, if you look through policies that I've been a part of, if this policy in a year or 6 months or 5 months or 2 years from now, if it's not serving us, we get to bring it back and change it. We get to change it. We get to do that. So we can be with a policy for a period of time and not 17 years maybe. But if it's not serving our district and our employees and our community, we can revisit it. That's allowed, so, anyway. Yes, Dr. Babson.
Thanks. Sure. So I've made a lot of big picture statements on this particular issue, enough. But I'll just make a couple more that sort of recap earlier ideas. So going on the ALA website and looking at their guidelines for selection and reconsideration, there's a statement that really jumped out at me. It says, any person has the right to express concerns about library resources and expect to have the objection taken seriously. So to me, that is really the crux of the matter for me, that anyone in the community should be able to express concern about anything in the school, whether it's a library resource or a curricular resource or whatever, and expect to have the objection taken seriously. So to me, what that means is that we codify a process for that taking seriously as much as we can. And we can be as detailed about that and prescriptive about that as we want to be, right? So put that idea to the side. I also kind of see removal and retention as two sides of the same coin. And this speaks to a point that was brought up earlier. A lot of times materials are removed from the library. We don't even know about it because it's part of a weeding process, right? Or whatever. It passes under our awareness for any number of reasons. So the third thing I just want to reiterate, something I mentioned last week, is that I think to me, I try to have a very long-term view and a very broad view of the future. The composition of the board, the dynamics and relationships among the administration, and then between the board and the administration. And in policy, you can't predict the future like in anything else. But what you try to do is you try to write the policy in such a way that it stands up to any number of future circumstances. So all that being said, I think that having some kind of, I appreciate your idea earlier that the ALA distinction between informal and formal may not be really relevant for us. We don't have to take that one up. But generally speaking, I like how things are going here. I mean, there's definitely layers to this. If this doesn't work, then you go to this person, then you go to this group of people. But I think that this is just an idea, but I mean, having the language, I think, of appeal, just that word in the policy can be, I think about function, but I also think about messaging. And I think about the second order message, the indirect message of having the word appeal in the policy. Because it does speak to this idea that I mentioned earlier that, I'm being taken seriously, that there is a mechanism for appeal and that word is actually in the policy. Look,
I don't see where the word appeal is or where you're proposing it.
Well, it's not in there, which is why I'm bringing it up.
Oh.
Yeah. So I think Ms. Lau brought it up earlier, this idea that, hey, actually, there is this procedure by which, a group of people in the public could petition, 3 board members to constitute or convene, a special board meeting, right? That mechanism could be mentioned in the policy or something like that, right?
So that's it. Let me put a pin in that. Mr. Christofko, I don't actually think that it's specifically about the public petitioning, and we don't have a petition procedure. That is a procedure of the board, that if the board wants to call a meeting, it comes from one of two things. Mm-hmm. Either the board president convenes a meeting, or in response to 3 board members formally requesting it of the board president. How that happens is often through the outreach of the community, mm-hmm. to your point. But Mr. Christofko, whichever policy it is that procedure, I don't know if cross-referencing that policy is needed or necessary here. It's not specifically referenced here, and I wouldn't personally propose or advocate for adding that, Dr. Babson, as a line in the guidelines, but it is a vehicle that it just exists, that is how procedurally how those things happen. You know, and I am aware of, although I am aware that there had been some consideration given at leadership when we had the conversation about the books, would a special meeting be called and what that would have taken. And it's my understanding, no, ultimately leadership decided, no, we're not gonna call a special meeting. There's a procedure to that and we weren't gonna do it. So we just had our conversation as in the regular business meeting.
Yeah, I believe that it's policy 006, and that provision comes out of the school code. The school code says that the board president has the power to call a special meeting at any time, and it also says the board president must call a special meeting if petitioned by 3 members of the board. So that's where it comes from. It's not limited to any specific topic, so it's a very broad procedure. I don't know. I mean, citing it here implies that that's the way that a challenge has to be made, which to me seems almost limiting.
True, but.
Versus just emailing in or showing up a public comment or, all of the other variety of ways that the public has to get on the board's radar.
Right.
But, it certainly, I mean, it's a valid procedure. I don't know that it'd be legally inappropriate to cite it.
The problem with citing it, if I could, Dr.
Sure.
Babson,
Yeah.
is that there is an argument to be made, then every single policy should have the cross-reference 006 because the public has the right to make a comment and to appeal any of our policies with which they have issue. So to specifically cite it here is almost unfair to all the other policies because it's unfair to the other policies, I think is the way for me to say it.
Okay. So that's fine. So is there any way, however, to still meet this scratch this itch that I have about satisfying that second order message to the public that we're taking them seriously and having the word appeal in there somewhere, perhaps, or some notion that is adjacent to that, just having it explicitly put in there. So, for example, in the case that I'm making this up, just really off the top of the head, if the concerned parents would like to challenge, again, wording is totally fungible.
I'm going to stop you to tell you that, no, we can't, because the board voted last week 7-2 to say, no, we would not like to do that. That's effectively what the board said last week, is that we don't want to have, the majority of the board said, no, we do not want that in this policy. So I appreciate, I know.
Want what?
Well, an appeal process, an appeal procedure. That was the crux of last week's vote, or I think it was last week, right? Yeah, last week's vote.
I thought it was just rejecting that specific policy.
It was rejecting the concept, do we want to allow for an appeal process about challenging books? No, we don't. The board said no last week with their vote.
Oh, okay.
That's how do you guys, that was, and that's why I asked you specifically where you thought you would put the word appeal in. If you meant, well, why don't you tell me how you meant it? Because if you mean it as an appeal, that was what in essence, what the board voted down last week. By virtue of approving this version, which did not have an appeal process in it.
Sure.
That's.
Okay, so my understanding was that it was rejecting the specific process that had been put into writing and enumerated and detailed, that it was jettisoning that it wasn't jettisoning the concept of appeal or even that word. I didn't get that at all. Plus, hold on, furthermore, I think the logic of appeal is actually embedded in this already, right? Because if the parent doesn't like what the librarian and principal talk about, they can quote-unquote appeal. I'm talking sort of metaphorically. they can appeal to the superintendent. And if they don't like that, you know, the idea is that they could appeal to the board, and then the board has the final say. You know, not by some, you know, process that we had before, but I mean, just simply that they could formally, you know, formally address the board, you know.
You wanted to say, oh, I know you wanted to say something a few minutes ago, so I was just
Yeah.
making sure if there was something you wanted to say. I heard the board saying that, you know, and I would just say that what I see in here is that the concern may be shared with the superintendent or designee. And it may certainly, I don't even think that in this policy, the way it's currently proposed, and that the board voted to approve, that the superintendent even has the authority to do anything different than ultimately what the librarian and the principal and the building principal decide in response to that discussion with the parent.
Okay, well, maybe we
And
can,
let me just finish,
yeah,
and that,
please.
back to the 006 procedure, implicit is any parent can reach out to board members when they are unhappy with the decision that I have found that parents reach out to us when they are not happy with something they've been told or the way something's going.
Yes, I mean, I recognize that, but I mean, that's different than having it explicitly encoded in policy. It's just it comes across differently. But look, I think that ultimately, if it's clear, that second point that you made, Susan, about that the superintendent, so, yeah, I mean, I'm just going through this again. So let's say the parent goes, it brings a concern, the librarian and the principal talk about it, they say, nope, it's good, it was selected under our process and we're good. And then in the language of the policy here, it says, then they can go to the superintendent and what? Just complain?
Share their concern.
Why? Why would they do that?
So that they, well, I mean, I don't
I mean,
know, but it is.
what would I'm sorry, but what would the point be of that if it weren't going to have any effect on the decision of the principal and the librarian?
I'm not sure.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
But Andrew, or Mr. Babson, is the main concern or the main focus in your point is to give a voice to a concerned parent or a member of our community?
Yes, and to have language, and this language can be as modest and general as the board could be comfortable with, and also in accordance with the decision that was made by the board majority last week, right? Could the language be very broad and still sort of speak to this idea of an appeal process or some kind of way for the parents to address the board that comes across as like an official process rather than it's all on you. You know, sort of putting up, because a lot of parents may never have heard of policy 006, or they may not know about these procedures, right?
I think it gets very murky because, I mean, as we're speaking through this, we're going back to offering a challenge if we do that, right? So if we want to enable a voice to be heard in our community, can we simply inform them of a board meeting and how a board meeting is run, and if they would like to express a concern, to voice it in public comment?
I think that's one thing that might be the result of a conversation with Dr. Batchelor. I think that's what I said to you before, you know, is that why would somebody reach out to Dr. Batchelor? Because they're still upset, right? So where would they go? They'd take it to the next level, go to Dr. Batchelor and say, I'm so upset that they think that a blue book is appropriate, you know, that whole example. And I would imagine that Dr. Batchelor would do his very best. He is very skilled at this, of having parents come to a place of feeling heard even when they don't like what they're hearing, and might suggest, to your point, Mrs. Rosenblum, about, you know, they could come to the board, you know, they could come make public comment. would the complaint procedure apply in this, the policy 906 apply in this one, Mr. Christoph Gott, or no?
I don't think that policy applies to like a specific book. It applies to overall programs of the district. So I don't think it gets down to the level of complaining about a specific book.
It's not about a book, I meant about complaining about an outcome that they don't like, just
Oh.
procedurally. You know, I didn't like the outcome I got with my conversation about policy 144.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the right policy or not.
Now, I think the generalized complaint procedure is really more about systems and processes than it is about individual outcomes. So I don't think that policy would provide a separate complaint mechanism.
Okay. Thank you. So I don't know, do you want to say anything?
I think you already said it, Ms. Stern or Chair Stern. I think this actually falls squarely within the question that was before the board last week, and the board voted 7-2, like voted it down and decided to go down this path, which is, I think, you know, in Dr. Babson's kind of estimation, we're not giving parents the right to an appeal or a challenge process because we don't believe that any parent should have the right to make a decision that affects every single student in the district, right? Simply by filling out a form or even appealing, right? Doing any of these things that are outlined in the policy. And, you know, I just would like to say that we can take things seriously without it having spelled out for us in a policy, right? Like, I think ultimately parents determine whether we take them seriously by our actions. And unfortunately, sometimes we disagree with them, and, you know, they might think we didn't take them seriously enough, but when we actually did take them seriously, we just happen to disagree. So I don't need a policy to tell me how to take things seriously. Like, I listen to every parent concern seriously. I don't take anyone not seriously, right? So I don't need a policy to tell me when to take things seriously. So, you know, I just would say we're still able to take things seriously, even if it's not spelled out explicitly in a policy. And, you know, even if it is, I made this comment last week, it's just performative, right? Like, if we give them words in a policy, but ultimately, you know, we're not giving them the power to do this, to determine what books get to go in our library. Like, we think that power should be reserved to our librarians. And, you know, for the most part, we trust them. We trust their professional judgment. If there are, you know, true exceptions, then that decision should be made by the full board and not any particular parent. So I do think this was a question that was asked and answered by the board last week.
Basically. So, yeah, all those points are very well taken. And I think that I would say simply that, well, I want to go back to my the points I was making, that retention and selection are two sides of the same coin. The other thing that I want to mention also is the third point that I made, which is, yes, Ms. Stern, if a certain board doesn't like a certain policy, they can take it up for review at any time. I understand that. So it's not like this is, you know, set in stone and it's carved in marble tablets and, you know, can't be changed for 100 years or something like that. I get it. But, you know, at the same time, I think it behooves us to you know, think long term. And I'm really concerned in imagining boards and administrations and people with different dynamics that are very, very different than now. And I'm trying to think about big picture and long term. And I'm trying to find a way to, you know, have this written in such a way that you can see things from multiple angles. And I think that I think that the way that we've written this is good, because I think that we're getting at the essence of the other policy that we got rid of, which is we are giving an avenue for parents to express their concern. Okay, and that does give the general second order vibe or feeling of taking one seriously. I think that yeah, the only thing, one other thing I just want to mention, I am not advocating for any kind of formal appeal process, right? That involves a form, that involves the constitution of a committee, that involves anything like that. I wouldn't. The only thing, the reason why I call it an appeal is simply that it's like the last recourse. That if they had a conversation with the superintendent, they didn't like it, they could then just request, dear board, please take up this matter at the next board meeting with a vote. And then the board votes one way or the other, and then it's done. I would say that there's a risk in that, what if the board votes against the judgment of the principal and the librarian and/or the superintendent? Then there's all kinds of mess, right? So perhaps keeping that out of the policy avoids that. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so to put a tie on this, I'm still gonna propose that we take the sentence that had started with materials, it's at the last sentence of the first paragraph, and make that the final sentence in this policy, just, because the other things are more procedurally related to the parent procedure in general, and then that is just a separate statement. So materials that meet the selection criteria in policy 144 shall not be removed without an affirmative majority vote of the school board. And we're gonna take that back as a first read, and I think, go ahead.
Well, so far, there haven't really been any actual substantive changes.
Oh, great.
So you wouldn't have to do another first read
Oh,
unless
if you
want
tell
to.
me that, I told Dr. Batsway, I said, I'm gonna say a bunch of things,
Right.
and then I'm gonna listen to Mr. Christopko and see, does he think, I didn't actually think it was substantive, because I'm moving a paragraph and I'm making some minor word
Right.
changes, but thank you. So we will see this on the board agenda as a second read, and we'll see what the board says. That's, do either of you have any final comments on this one? Alrighty, great, so thank you for that guidance, Mr. Christopko, I appreciate that. Great, so we are done with that. Do we have any new business tonight? Super, and thank you, everybody. I really do appreciate you bearing with that. We have no public comment that I can see in the room, so with that, I will call our meeting adjourned. Everyone should have a lovely summer. Thank you so much.